Activist Radio is on the air. You have tuned into the Mark Harrington Show, sponsored by Created Equal. Mark is training a new generation of leaders to take on the culture of death and win.
If you don't like abortion, don't have one.
The only thing that can be said to be objective truth is that there is no objective truth.
It does come out in one piece. It comes out in one piece.
I would argue that we certainly are not all created equal.
And now, here's Mark.
That's right, your radio activist, Mark Harrington, here on the debut program of Activist Radio, your voice of resistance, coming to you live from Created Equal's broadcast studio here in Columbus, Ohio. This is our debut program, our first attempt at this. And as many of you know, I have been on the radio on and off for about 15 years, so I've got a little bit of experience with this. So hopefully I can take some of that experience and now move to a different media venue, which is the online platforms of Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter and Periscope, along with the podcast, that is, which will be the MP3, the audio, which we will save and be able to put on on our podcast websites, iTunes, Podbean, and others, so you can listen to the program anytime you like, 24/7 on your mobile device. So if you would, Mr. Producer, put up the screen that shows the different media venues that we're going to be broadcasting on. Every Thursday hereafter, from today forward, at 1 p.m., you'll be able to listen to and watch the Mark Harrington Show, your radio activist, here on these social media platforms. So we got a lot to cover today. We want to be talking about the Neil Gorsuch hearings in Washington, D.C., the confirmation hearings, that is, of Neil Gorsuch. So there's going to be a lot to talk about today. We have some really cool video clips of Mr. Gorsuch answering questions by senators regarding the issue of Roe versus Wade. But before we do, let me give you a little background on myself. I am the national director for Created Equal. We're an organization that is dedicated to raising up the next generation of leaders to take on the culture of death and win. We're not necessarily a political organization, although we do get involved in politics when necessary. But we're in the business of changing hearts and minds primarily. And I've been at this for 25 years. And so I think what you're going to find on this program is you might get a different perspective than you would from other programs or other folks like myself, because I have been boots on the ground for 25 years. I'm an activist. I'm not an intellectual, admittedly. I'm not someone who does a lot of speaking, touring to speak, or writing per se. My job is to get people into the game. So that's the goal of the program. And I ask you to tune in every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and you're going to hopefully be entertained and also informed by what you see and hear on the program. So what we want to do, without further ado, is jump right into some of the content of the program, and that is, first of all, talk about the Gorsuch hearings in Washington, D.C. As an introduction, let me just be straightforward here. I voted for Donald Trump. I was not one of his cheerleaders, per se. In fact, I was a never-Trumper for quite a long time, until it became clear that he was going to get the nomination for the Republican Party for president. Once he did, pretty much made my mind up that I had to get behind his candidacy, because I simply wanted to block the door to the White House from Hillary Clinton. That was the goal here. I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump per se, but I can tell you this: Hillary Clinton posed a threat to the American way of life, and of course abortion on demand would have kept on going for forever, as far as I'm concerned. And Donald Trump, represented the only hope we had to block the door. Of course, the U.S. Supreme Court figured into that. Now, I'm not one to look to Washington per se, or the U.S. Supreme Court, to solve every problem we have. I don't look to Washington, D.C. to solve the abortion issue per se. We've had 45 years of Republican nominees to the U.S. Supreme Court that have gone on the court. Many of them have disappointed us. I'm under no illusion that Mr. Trump's going to put somebody up there necessarily that's going to vote to overturn Roe. But I know what we were going to get with Hillary Clinton. Therefore, I cast a vote for Donald Trump in hopes that maybe we could get someone on the court that might be an anti-Roe vote. So when President Trump, when he won the election and then nominated Neil Gorsuch to the U.S. Supreme Court, I was one that held back, and I was one who said, you know what, I think it's best that we not jump on the bandwagon right away. I didn't become a cheerleader for this man because I think the jury's way out on this person. There's not enough information on him to know for certain how he might be as a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And so I called for extreme vetting. If you recall, Donald Trump's been asking for extreme vetting when it comes to immigrants coming into America. Well, I called for extreme vetting on Judge Gorsuch, and that is that we shouldn't just automatically jump on the bandwagon, assume this man's going to do the right thing when it comes to issues like abortion. Therefore, I said, there's no advantage, in my opinion, in endorsing this guy prematurely. I don't think endorsements matter a whole lot, frankly. I mean, this guy's going to make it or not make it, irrespective of whether I or other pro-life leaders endorse it. That's my opinion. But so I held back, and to this day I'm not prepared to endorse him, especially with some of the testimony that we heard in Washington this week. So, and the other reason is we have a track record here. We've had Republican presidents, Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, who have put up justices that have disappointed us on many issues, including abortion. So we don't want to get suitored, and so as far as it goes, that's why I didn't endorse it. Now, Judge Gorsuch might be the best Supreme Court justice we've ever had. He might be another Antonin Scalia. We don't know that. We certainly didn't know it before the hearings, and I still don't believe we know that even now after the hearings. So when we get to we're going to get to the video clips on the hearings here in a second. What we do know about Judge Gorsuch are a couple things. First of all, he wrote a book called The Future of Assisted Suicide and Euthanasia. And in that book, he did say that human life is intrinsically valuable and the intentional killing of a human being is always wrong. Okay, that's a good thing, right? As it relates to assisted suicide, at least that's what he said. Now, we could extrapolate that and to the issue of abortion, and many have. I don't know if that's necessarily fair or not, and you'll see that one of the senators actually refers to this quote in his book when he asks him a question. We know that Gorsuch has sided with religious liberty in the case of Hobby Lobby and the Little Sisters of the Poor. We also know that President Trump said he was going to appoint justices to the U.S. Supreme Court in the mold of Antonin Scalia. Okay, and he also said he was going to appoint pro-life justices. That's the first time that any GOP nominee, in my recollection, has ever said that. They've always said, oh, we don't have a litmus test when it comes to U.S. Supreme Court justice nominations. But in this case, President Trump was very out front, very overt about it. He said, I'm going to appoint people who are pro-life. I'm going to appoint people who will overturn Roe. So he made it very explicit. And so that sets the stage for these hearings. And in the last couple of days, we've seen Neil Gorsuch take the stand at these hearings. And there's been several comments I think that we can unpack here. Some of them not so encouraging, in my opinion. So what we want to do right now, we're going to jump right to it because the program is short. We're going to jump right to it. Here's the first clip that I have. This is Neil Gorsuch answering a question from Senator Lindsey Graham about whether President Trump asked him to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Had you ever met President Trump personally?
Not until my interview.
In that interview, did he ever ask you to overrule Roe v. Wade?
No, Senator.
What would he have done if he'd asked?
Senator, I would have walked out the door.
Wow.
It's not what judges do.
Now there's a bombshell for you. I mean, that's what he said. He goes, listen to this guy. Now he says that he would have walked out the door of Judge Gorsuch. He would have walked out the door of Donald Trump's office, the Oval Office, the leader of the free world, if he were asked to vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, I know what people are saying. He shouldn't be asked that question. It's out of bounds. No president should ask a question to a prospective justice on the Supreme Court about something that he might rule on in the future. I get it. But think about it. Donald Trump's not your normal candidate. He's not a normal president. He said that he was going to appoint justices who were pro-life. So is it really that hard to imagine that he might have asked Judge Gorsuch whether he was going to overturn Roe v. Wade? I don't think so. So I don't think Judge Gorsuch would have been probably very, that would have been something he wouldn't have figured he might have said. So it seems to me that his reaction, in my opinion, was a little bit, well, he overreacted, let's just say. He reserved some of his strongest responses to this question of whether he would, what he would do if Donald Trump asked him to vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. In essence, what Judge Gorsuch is saying is that he would have not only walked out of the door, but he would have withdrawn his nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court because he asked him a question on whether he would overturn Roe. Now, to me, that's not only an overreaction, I mean, it's beyond belief. Now, it's okay for the guy to say, well, respectfully, Mr. President, because the issue of abortion could come before me on the court, I am going to reserve comment. In fact, I'm not going to comment on something that I might have to rule on in the future. That would have been completely acceptable. But no, he said he's going to walk out on the president. He's going to withdraw his nomination. To me, that's very concerning because of the words, the strongest words in the entire hearing that day were reserved for that question. So that's the first clip. The second clip here we have is from Senator Grassley. He's asking Judge Gorsuch about precedent, specifically about Roe versus Wade, and how he views precedent. Go ahead and play that clip.
Well, let's go to a kind of a more controversial issue, but along the same lines I've been asking you. I think the case that most people are thinking about right now, and the case that every nominee gets asked about, Roe v. Wade, can you tell me whether Roe was decided correctly?
Senator, again, I would tell you that Roe versus Wade, decided in 1973, is a precedent in the United States Supreme Court. It has been reaffirmed. The reliance interest considerations are important there.
Stop there. All right, so he talks about precedent. And, obviously a judge is going to consider precedent. But most importantly, I would hope he's going to consider what the U.S. Constitution says. There was no reference to that. What does the Constitution say as it relates to abortion? Nothing said about that, only about precedent. And what that means is stare decisis. That is that the judges look at precedent, as they should, along with the U.S. Constitution, and then decide. But he went beyond that, and he talked about what is referred to as the reliance interest. And if you don't know what that is, that was something that was invented by Sandra Day O'Connor in the Casey decision, when she basically said that Roe versus Wade is constitutional, and she was one of the justices that voted to uphold Roe and Casey. And one of her main arguments in the Casey decision was that American women depend upon abortion, and therefore we have to keep the ruling intact. That was one of her main reasons in the Casey decision. And since then, it's been referred to as the reliance interest. This is the first time that a nominee by a Republican president has ever referenced, in my recollection, the concept of a reliance interest as a reason to uphold a ruling such as Roe v. Wade. And therefore, I think that's, in my opinion, very problematic. Why would he bring this up? First of all, this whole issue of reliance interest is bogus. I mean, now in some cases it might make some sense, but think about this. Would a judge, in reviewing Dred Scott, think about the reliance interest in that ruling? Because certainly Americans and the American economy depended on slavery to continue on. They wanted to see that institution intact as they went forward. Just think if a justice would have said, oh, well, because American slavery is relied upon by slaveholders in the South, therefore we're going to retain this ruling and keep it intact because Americans rely on it. I mean, think about it when it comes to Plessy versus Ferguson, for an example. Americans relied on segregation. It was built into our culture and society. Yet could you imagine a judge saying, well, the reliance interests of Plessy versus Ferguson, because Americans have depended on segregation, we're going to retain that ruling? I mean, think about it. Reason why that doesn't make any sense, because we see those two rulings as immoral and unconstitutional. Well, Roe v. Wade's immoral and unconstitutional, and the reliance interest, whether we should, American society certainly does depend on it right now. Women depend upon abortion as a form of birth control. I get it. But it's immoral. It's wrong. It's the shedding of innocent blood. It's murder. And beyond that, it's unconstitutional. To use the reliance interest to uphold Roe v. Wade or even reference it in this hearing, to me, is problematic. So and there are others that agree with me on this. Clark Forsyth from Americans United for Life wrote in his book, Politics for the Greatest Good, The Case for Prudence in the Public Square. He says that this whole concept of the reliance interest, invented by Sandra Day O'Connor and Casey, was a bad idea. So let's move on. He talks further about the decision of Griswold versus Connecticut. Go ahead and play that clip. Yes. No, it's not.
The president said.
No, this is the wrong one. Go back one, and just play where you left off at the other one. Go ahead and play it.
And all of the other factors that go into analyzing precedent have to be considered. It is a precedent of the United States Supreme Court. It was reaffirmed in Casey in 1992 and in several other cases. So a good judge will consider it as precedent of the United States Supreme Court, worthy as treatment of precedent like any other.
What about Griswold, which was decided a few years before Roe, the case where the court found constitutional right to privacy? Can you tell me your views on Griswold?
Senator, it's a precedent that's now 50 years old. Griswold involved the right of married couples to use contraceptive devices in the privacy of their own home.
All right, let's stop it there. So he references Griswold, which, by the way, was the foundation for Roe v. Wade. The idea that this so-called right to privacy, that's when it was invented, as it extends to reproductive health of women. And the fact that he even references the idea, the concept of the right to privacy, which, by the way, you can't find anywhere in the U.S. Constitution. The words don't exist in the text. They were made up as it extends to the issue of birth control and then in 1973 with abortion. The fact that he even referenced it and the right to privacy as precedent, it is precedent, but it's a bad precedent. This is what activist judges do. They take and they insert into the text concepts like the right to privacy that don't exist, and that set the stage for Roe versus Wade. All right, let's go to the next clip. This is Senator Dianne Feinstein from California asking Mr. Gorsuch about the issue of super precedent and the stability of the law.
The president said that he would appoint someone who would overturn Roe. You pointed out to me that you viewed precedent in a serious way in that it added stability to the law. Could you elaborate on the point that you made in my office on that?
Part of the value of precedent, it has lots of value. It has value in and of itself because it's our history. And our history has value intrinsically. But it also has an instrumental value in this sense. It adds to the determinacy of law. We have lots of tools that allow us to narrow the realm of admissible dispute between parties. so that people can anticipate and organize their affairs. It's part of the reason why the rule of law in this country works so well. We have statutes, we have rules, we have a fact-finding process and a judicial system that's the envy of the world. And precedent is a key part of that because, as the chairman pointed out when he quoted a piece of mine, once a case is settled, that adds to the determinacy of the law. What was once a hotly contested issue is no longer a hotly contested issue.
All right, go ahead and stop there. He talks about the determinacy of the law, which is basically that, again, that Americans depend upon the stability of rulings like Roe versus Wade and others to order their lives. And therefore, I mean, that's a reason why we need to look at that, and it's important that there ought to be some stability in the law. I get that in some regards. But again, if we're talking about the shedding of innocent blood, the wholesale slaughter of preborn babies, a genocide like the world's never seen, who cares about the determinacy of law? Who cares about the stability of a law like that? My goodness, it's leading to the demise of America, the killing of innocent children. Furthermore, he talks about how once this issue is decided or settled, as he says, settled law, like Roe v. Wade is supposedly settled law, and I guess in the strict legal sense of it, it is, because we've had 45 years of it, that this idea that once it is settled law, a hotly contested issue, as he said, no longer is hotly contested. Well, I don't know what about you, but abortion is more hotly contested today probably than it was in 1973. So the idea that Roe v. Wade now being so-called settled law and being a stable ruling has made it no longer a contested issue is just false. In fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a sitting U.S. Supreme Court justice, commented that Roe v. Wade did nothing to settle the issue of abortion. In fact, it took it away from the people and the legislatures to decide, and it put it in the realm of the federal government, where it doesn't belong anyway. And so she, being a liberal justice, even says that Roe v. Wade was handled incorrectly. Of course, she goes further, saying that the right to abortion should be found in equal protection. We can talk about that later. But the idea that this so-called settled law of Roe v. Wade will somehow remove it from being hotly contested is just patently incorrect. All right, let's go to this last clip. This is Senator Dick Durbin asking Judge Gorsuch about whether he believes Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. Go ahead and play that clip.
A statement which you made in that book, which has been often quoted, and I want to make sure that I quote it accurately here today. It relates to the taking of life.
Good question, by the way. Excellent.
And I quote, "The intentional taking of human life by private persons is always wrong." That was a statement that you included in your book, correct?
I believe so.
I believe so, too. How could you square that statement with legal abortion?
Senator, as the book explains, the Supreme Court of the United States has held in Roe versus Wade that a fetus is not a person for purposes of the 14th Amendment.
Which is correct legally.
And the book explains that.
Just stating the
facts.
facts.
Do you accept that?
That's the law of the land. I accept the law of the land, Senator, yes.
All right, stop it there.
Thank you for
Now, I understand why he's saying this, and a lot of people will take it different ways, but, I mean, he is speaking truthfully about what the law reads. I mean, Roe v. Wade said that it was not a person, as we understand it in the 14th Amendment. I get that. True, it's true, legally speaking. That's what Roe v. Wade ruled. I get it. But he went beyond that, and he said, I accept it. I accept it. He didn't need to say that. He could have said, oh, that is the current ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court. It's the opinion of the court. Therefore, it has the weight of law in our culture. I get it. But the truth of the matter is, judges, federal judges and others, don't make law. They don't make law. That's the problem. They make opinions. They hand down opinions. Now, those opinions, unfortunately, have become de facto law, and we treat them as law, and we act like they're law. So in that sense, it's true, because we act like Roe v. Wade is law, and we adhere to the ruling as law. It is law in that sense. But judges don't make law. Courts don't make law. Legislatures make law, and that's a problem. I would have liked him to say, we consider it the law of the land. However, legislatures make law, not judges, not the Supreme Court. We're only to interpret the law. And I think that, maybe gives us another insight into this man's thinking. The problem with Roe v. Wade overall, and the fact that we look to the U.S. Supreme Court to solve the problem of abortion, which is problematic from the beginning, and we've had 45 years of attempting to do that unsuccessfully, is that we've allowed the judges, we've allowed the courts, we've allowed the U.S. Supreme Court to usurp the role of the legislature. They become super legislatures, and in Roe v. Wade, that's exactly what happened. 9 judges, unelected, in the U.S. Supreme Court decided for hundreds of millions of Americans that abortion would be decriminalized. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that an immoral law is no law at all, and therefore we're not bound to adhere to it. And I believe that those who bend the knee to the worst ruling in history, which is Roe versus Wade, are no better than the ones who wrote it. Now, I don't know about Judge Gorsuch going forward. All I can tell you right now, I'm not going to endorse the man. We may get suitored. We're not going to know that until he gets on the court and maybe says something in regards to Roe versus Wade, or possibly writes an opinion either in support or dissent. We don't know. We won't know. He certainly has given us no indications in this hearing as to whether he would vote against it. He certainly gave us lots of indications that he wouldn't vote to overturn it, I think. And people will say, oh, well, he's just doing that because he wants to get through the confirmation hearings. I get it. I understand that. And if he would have been very clear about his intentions to overturn Roe v. Wade, he'd never get on the U.S. Supreme Court. I understand that, too. So I'm not saying he should have said, I'm a sure vote against Roe, and therefore his confirmation would have gone down in flames. I understand all that. And often these justices use the idea that they're supposedly independent and therefore not supposed to project how they would rule on in the future on a ruling that might come before them. And they say that, and Gorsuch said that many times during the hearings, that he needs to remain independent, and therefore he can't say how he might rule in a case. I understand that. But that hasn't stopped people like Antonin Scalia from saying that Roe v. Wade is bad law. He said that a number of times. He's a sitting U.S. Supreme Court justice. He's a justice that heard abortion issues, cases brought to the court, yet he was clear about his views on Roe versus Wade. So was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for that matter. She didn't claim independence, and she's a sitting court justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. So he does it for political reasons only. That's the only thing I can figure, is that because he needs to get confirmed, he wants to win some Democrat votes, and he needs to win at least 52. He's got the possibility of getting 52 Republican votes. He's going to say that he's not going to prejudice himself when it comes to Roe versus Wade. Here's the bottom line in the last minute or so of the program, of our debut program, the Mark Harrington Show, and that is this. I'm not going to endorse that Neil Gorsuch at this point. Not sure it really matters a whole lot because I've been around long enough. I've seen this before. I've sat through and watched Ronald Reagan put up Justice Kennedy, who turned out to be deciding votes on abortion and other things in the negative. I've seen Ronald Reagan put up Sandra Day O'Connor that kept Roe versus Wade in law in the Casey decision. I've watched George W. Bush the first put Justice Souter on the Supreme Court. So we look forward to seeing you next time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, here on Facebook and other social media platforms. God bless you. God bless America. And remember, America, to bless God.
For more information on how to become a witness against the evil plague in America, call Created Equal at 614-269-7808, 614-269-7808, or go online to createdequal.net. Createdequal.net. Be sure to tune to The Mark Harrington Show next time for your marching orders in the culture war.